Warning. The following video contains strong language that some viewers may find offensive or disturbing.
Former anti-vaxxers. What caused you to change your mind? I was a teenager used to believe that if I got sick, my immune system would handle it and make me stronger. Like most youth, I believed I was invulnerable. I figured, thousands of years of ancestors had survived without vaccines. And so could I. It was years before I realized that before vaccines, people didn't just kill the viruses away, most of them died or were crippled by illness their whole lives. My ex-husband was a very controlling person and did not want our kids to get vaccines. I was always so scared knowing my kids had no protection. One day one of our kids scraped themselves on a fence and the school called me. I snapped and took them straight to an urgent care for a tetanus shot and just started secretly getting all my kids' vaccines. We eventually divorced and now all my kids are fully caught up. My mom told me last week when we were talking about a COVID-19 vaccine that she nearly didn't have my brother and I vaccinated. I was shocked. Because she was a nurse for years and years. And she now stresses the importance of getting our yearly flu vaccinations and pushes my needle-phobic dad to get his. Basically, when she was doing her nurse training back in the early 70s, she did a few weeks on the only ward in the country at the time for people with profound and multiple disabilities, PMLD. The majority were born with PMLD or had them as a result of oxygen deprivation at birth. But she was told that a handful of them developed them following vaccine injury. Not sure if this is a medically accepted term, but those are the words she used, from a single bad batch of vaccines for measles and rubella. I think, by the time my brother and I were born in 1988 and 1990, she was still affected by what she'd seen back in the 70s. And although she'd seen the progress in vaccinations and there were no more reports of these bad batches of vaccines, she didn't allow them to give us our first vaccine doses on time. It wasn't until my aunt, also a trained nurse, showed her the latest stats and research about vaccines that she reluctantly decided to have us vaccinated. I was 1 year old at the time and scheduled for the MMR jab. It was the Mr. Vaccine that she was told caused these vaccine injuries. And she was very reluctant to go ahead with it, but ultimately agreed that both my brother, 2.5 at the time, needed to catch up on all our vaccines. She didn't take us to get them. She sent my dad instead, again. Needle-phobic, and he and I apparently cried the whole time. She told me that she'd glad she decided for us to get the vaccines as we've been mostly healthy since then. And if it hadn't been for our aunt we might not have ever been vaccinated. I'll give you an historical one. In 1736 I lost one of my sons. A fine boy of 4 years old. By the smallpox. Taken in the common way. I long regretted bitterly, and still regret that I had not given it to him by inoculation. This I mention for the sake of parents who omit that operation, on the supposition that they should never forgive themselves if a child died under it. My example showing that the regret may be the same either way and that, therefore, the safer should be chosen. Benjamin Franklin. I don't really know why I didn't like the idea of vaccines, but I didn't until my girlfriend had gotten pregnant and then I stepped on a rusty nail. Like the only way to stop tetanus is the vaccine. Edit, my girlfriend was pregnant and asked what I would do if my daughter picked up tetanus after I told her I stepped on rusty nail, was unaware how tetanus or really any vaccines work, if that gives an insight to anti-vaxxers. Not all, but yeah. My now wife was an anti-vaxxer. I generally go with what she says most of the time because I cannot be bothered to argue. However, when we were discussing getting married and having kids I was surprised at how strongly I felt about. I was prepared to walk away from the love of my life rather than not vaccinate. I gave all of the reasons. I'm from a third world country and she is European. I have seen too much shit from a lack of vaccination program to sit on the fence on this. She came around. When our first was born he was quite ill. I don't think we were in danger of losing him, but just that tiny bit of danger reiterated the point of protecting them and others from illnesses. My wife is now more on top of the vaccination dates for our kids than I am. A friend of hers had a baby recently and expressed some anti-vaccination sentiments. My wife calmly told her that not only would she be putting her own kids in danger but that she would be weaponizing her child against others. Quite a turnaround. Kind of boring. But I have a whack job grandmother who believes in all the pseudoscience health BS. Crystal healing. Electromagnetic communications cause cancer. Vaccines are bad. Eat apricot pits to cure cancer. The whole 9 miles. When I was a kid she tried to teach me all of this stuff like it was gospel. And I believed her because I was a kid, and why would my grandmom be wrong about something? Unfortunately for her, the minute I turned like 7, I got a huge hyperfixation on biology and quickly learned that all the stuff she spouted was utter BS. I'm autistic. And I was like the stereotypical autistic kid where they just know a fuckton about one particular subject and devour any kind of learning material related to it they can get their hands on. I'm actually still like that. Except now I can get a degree for it. It was not hard for me to realize that none of the things she believed made any sense. Even as a kid. Hard to say, but reading, honestly, I was on the elderberry, colloidal silver, whatever natural bullshit flavor of the week in my late teens, early 20s. Could dig up some obscure study from the 1960s to support it. Well, flu shots aren't 100% effective. What's the point? Have you seen all the people who get sick from it? Etc., etc. Simply put, I had bad advice from some of my father's vitamin shop. Libertarian, naturopath, whatever friends. In grad school I took more statistics classes. Keep reading about data analysis. Started to learn what significant sample sizes meant. Common logical and statistical fallacies and surprise. Most anti-science nonsense doesn't hold up empirically at all. There's just no data to support it. And requires torturing of statistics and misrepresentation to defend their case. Luckily I don't have some epic story of a family member dying from a preventable disease. But it's still embarrassing to think back how arrogantly I was convinced I was more clever than the actual doctors and scientists. I met my Mill, who is the ultimate anti-vaxxer, and realized how fucking crazy she sounds, and I didn't want to end up like that. Also I have a baby daughter who I would like to live a long healthy life. I read an article about a mom who changed her view on vaccinations because of how radical the anti-vax groups were. A lot of them were anti-gay, anti-abortion, and so crazy about all of it. Pro the dumbest shit. Like oils. Pushed the agendas of things that were obviously false. It made her step back and change her entire outlook on the anti-vax movement. I wish I could find this article. It was pretty interesting. Probably on Facebook. But she made great points against them. Not me, but my cousin. She was extremely anti-vax for most of her life. And she refused to vaccinate her kids when they were born. Her second baby caught whooping cough. Passed it to her first kid. And they both almost died. According to her, nearly losing her kids made her realize that she was an idiot for not vaccinating them. I was a stereotypical, naturalistic vegan type. Didn't believe in essential oils or crystal healing or anything. Just believed, mistakenly, that you couldn't beat nature and that vaccines were messing around with my baby's natural immunity growth. I believed they were an unnecessary risk. I knew my decision was controversial, so I kept it quiet. I wouldn't have been out campaigning or splashing it all over social media. It was a private decision. I held off until he was 2. We don't routinely vaccinate for chickenpox here in the UK, so he got it, which is expected. However, he got a bacterial infection on top and had to spend a night in hospital. Nothing too traumatic, but I realized I didn't have the balls to play nature v. medicine anymore. Not me, but my Nona. She's always been into oils. Healing rocks. Potatoes in socks. All that weird shit. When I was sick, she would give me a bath and run her hand right above my skin. From head to toe, to draw out the sickness. When my youngest cousin was born, she practically moved into my aunt's house and went everywhere with them. When she took him to get his shots, my Nona started fussing with the pediatrician and he just talked. All he did was explain shit to her. And she finally understood how batshit she sounded. She still firmly believes that my cat is gonna steal my firstborn's breath. But we're working on it. Edit, I never thought a little story about my Nona would get so much attention LMAO. For those asking, she would cut a potato into slices and stick a slice in each of my socks when I was sick. In the morning they were supposed to be black. Meaning they had drawn out whatever toxins were in my body. My mom is anti-vax and I'm reminded every day of how annoying she is because she's also against vaccines for COVID-19 and thinks that the whole rule about wearing face masks is to move America to Islamic rule with women covering their faces and everything. She's also hugely Islamophobic, and long story short, I hate being home. Well, after years of deluding myself into the belief that vaccines were evil, I finally hit the wall. I learned more about vaccines and why they were really necessary. I think it was my fear of the unknown that prevented me from seeing that science saves lives. I had a really good teacher in that regard and it ended up being a pretty great time in my life. I mean, on top of realizing that shots weren't bad things, I started getting an allowance and my 10th birthday party was fucking lit. The research changed. I had my eldest shortly before Wakefield was debunked. When internet forums were way more common than Facebook and mommy blogs were all the rage a la Julia and Julia. It was also about the time the CDC proactively began removing thoramine thimerosal from vaccines. Just in case the pediatricians didn't fight me on it. I met and married my husband and he was pro-vaccine. Wakefield was multi-disproved and we stared a delayed schedule. Then it came out that he was being paid for his results and he was developing a different measles vaccine. My next two were fully vaccinated on schedule. Not me. My wife. My wife is actually brilliant. One of the smartest people I know. Nobody would have ever guessed this about her. She was against vaccinations for our second because she was concerned that our first son ended up on the spectrum because of the vaccines he was given. It was all about fear of the unknown. And control. Externally it was, I just want to be sure we are doing the best we can for him. Really it was, I am afraid of making the wrong choice and I don't realize that inaction is a choice. She never said, no vaccines, she said, let's wait. I never relented. I had 2 points for my wife that kept coming up. 1. We have no reason to believe that vaccines cause autism. 2. I'd rather our kids be autistic than dead. The first one started with those exact words and basically never changed. The second one was a slow build up over time until I finally got to that exact wording. She cried. She realized that she felt the exact same way. She thanked me. All 3 of our kids gets vaccines at normal times except when a pediatrician who knows our medical situation suggests something different. Some people think vaccines cause autism. They are just bad at spelling. Vaccines cause adults. My mom and dad used to be anti-vax until I was almost kicked out of the school I was accepted into for not having the required vaccinations. Back then this school was a really good school that was hard to get into. And my parents didn't want me to go to a normal school and so they started Googling until eventually they found out it wasn't what they thought it was. They originally thought, and kind of still do, vaccines were just mercury mixed with a virus along with mind control chemicals. I grew up and realized my mom was wrong thanks to my now hubs convincing me. I got many vaccines in college and I'm doing just fine. My mom gave us some vaccines like the tetanus vac. But that's about it. Coronavirus. I've never feared for my life before. This pandemic made me realize what it would have been like in the days of polio. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button. See you next time.